also like, um, so Jen, you and I were just talking about the fact that it is a different world. Like we're now sitting in 2024, and you and I are having an open conversation about fertility stuff, which like would never have happened like in years past. And you were just sharing a story with me about a teacher in your kid's school.
Yeah, so I had heard, but didn't want to approach the person at the time and overwhelm her, that she had had a miscarriage, and it was very sad. It was my daughter's old school, so I wasn't seeing her on the regular, and she just posted on Facebook that that today was her baby's due date, and she was sharing the story. And I really, I thanked her for sharing it and normalizing the loss. And to me, in the times when I was going through infertility 10 to 12 years ago, like those conversations were only had very, very privately. Maybe you would go for a walk with someone. Maybe someone would say to you, like, oh, have you talked to so-and-so? Or it was a really like behind the scenes conversation. And now I posted on my Facebook page when my daughter was almost a year old, I felt comfortable to come out and tell my story vaguely. And in that time, so that was 8 years ago, I've seen so many people come forward, or not even just publicly on social media or like within their own social media private sphere, but just be much more open about talking about it and normalizing these sorts of losses and different types of conception. And now in my community, we have a few people who have used donor eggs, a bunch who have used donor sperm, and lots of IVF. And it's so different than it was. It used to just be a couple people, and now it's really, the light has been shown on this issue, and it's really nice to be on this end of it.
A couple people, or so you thought, because nobody was talking about it, so nobody knew.
Right. I mean, I feel like when it was clear that I had reached a certain level of infertility, I got connected into that circle that no one wants to be part of. And so like, I knew, who it was. And then as I've been open about talking about it, because that's a core value of mine, that more people have talked to me about their experience. And that's been nice to be able to give people support and connect other people through the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we kind of like jumped all the way ahead, but now we're going to come back, and I'm going to properly introduce you. So Jen is has been a board member for Hasidah for the last 8 years, passionate about supporting people in the fertility space. And she has her whole other history and bio, which we're going to put all in the show notes and tell you all about who she is. But we're here today because you have a story about how your family came to be, and it's some of them, and maybe I shouldn't have even given that spoiler, but okay, maybe I did it already, so fine. Some of them come from an egg donor. So walk us back to, the kind of community you grew up in, and then, when you got married and sort of when you discovered things were not going as planned, and then how you kind of walked your way into this world, or tiptoed or walked, however it was.
So I grew up Reform, very involved, committed Reform. And in high school, I kind of got a glimpse into what modern Orthodoxy was and knew that I wanted to head into that direction. And so between college and my early 20s, I had a good relationship with my rabbi at the shul that my stepfather had grown up at. And he helped me take on more mitzvot. I went and studied in Israel to learn a bit more, and slowly affiliated as traditional.
Hold on. Lost you for a second. Okay.
Okay.
So slowly started to the connection was bad for a second.
Okay.
Slowly
So
started taking on some more mitzvah and
then by the time I was 26, 25, 26, I was fully Shomer Shabbos kosher. And I met my husband at Mission Minyan in San Francisco, and he had grown up modern Orthodox, but was off the derech, as you'd say. And I said,
okay. What does that mean? What does that
so
mean?
off the derech means like off the path. Like he wasn't observant anymore. He was just coming back to wanting to be part of a Jewish community. And I actually didn't even know that he had that background when we were friends until I was at a Shabbat lunch on the Upper West Side, and someone was like, "Oh, do you know Izzy? I think he has a different name now." And I was like, "Oh, do you mean Ian?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I actually like just messaged her on Facebook like in the last year. And I was like, "You know that was when I realized that he had a secret from name, and like that launched our whole relationship." So like she should just take credit for all of
It's
that.
so great. It's so great.
And a few other people. And so we got married. I was 27, and I knew about fertility because my sister had a very long struggle with endometriosis. And she already had 2 kids when we got married. So she had kind of come past that and had, thank God, been able to heal herself through birth. And I knew that like we wanted to, maybe have a year of marriage and then start trying. And I still felt like for San Francisco standards, I was very young. And I knew of people who would get into their late 30s or early 40s or late 40s and start trying with IVF. And I never really thought that if I got married at 27 and started trying at 28, that there would be any problems. And so the first year went by of trying, and I had no positive pregnancy tests. And so my sister was like, "You should see a reproductive endocrinologist." So I started the test that they had me do, and everything looked fine. And so I did 6 rounds of IUI, which I'm not sure I would ever do again.
Oh my God.
I definitely tell people not to do more than 1 to 3. But I think like the doctor wasn't really managing me, and I was young, and they just wanted to keep trying. Like, and then I moved with that same doctor to IVF, and they were it was part of this HMO. So I was part of a cohort who were all getting things done kind of timed at the same time. And they're just like, "This is what we do. We put in like the morning of the day 3 transfer." They're like, I had like 18 embryos, or I don't know.
Wow.
I had enough that was like a lot. People felt really positive. And so they were like, "Do you want 1 or 2?" And we were like, "Oh no, could we have twins? Should we do it?" And we're like, "Let's put in 2." I was so desperate at that point. I was like on adoption websites looking at babies who were being weaned off of drugs and being like, "Maybe I should just do this instead." My husband's like, "Let's keep trying this." And so we put in 2, but the next day, or maybe on day 5, we got the call that none of our embryos made it to blastocyst. So
Meaning that you put in 2 on day 3, but all the rest of them, like the 16 that were left, like didn't make it.
Totally.
Oh my God.
So in that moment, I was they were like, "Well, that happens sometimes." But in that moment, I kind of knew that it wasn't going to work. Like, I was like, maybe I get pregnant, but probably not. I remember one of my friends, we had talked when I had found out that I had 18 embryos, and she's like, "Oh my goodness, you're going to have 18 babies." I mean, we were so stupid. And so that was bad. But I switched to a different, more specialized, I mean, not that specialized, but like a private, not HMO, reproductive endocrinologist that some other people had used. And we went there, and they were like, "Okay, let's try again." I was like, "I'm not doing a fresh transfer. We are going to freeze the embryos, then we'll work from She couldn't call because it was Shabbat. But
Hold on. You totally froze for about 30 seconds. So
okay, so where did it
go back to, so you went to a new doctor and, and
so we went to a new doctor and she was very positive, like this is going to work. I said, I'm only doing day 5 transfers. And she said, fine. But day 5, and I had lots of embryos again. And on day 3, it was still looking really good. And day 4 was Friday, day 5 was Saturday. And so with my rabbi, I had to figure out how we were going to get there. And my sister's nanny was driving us. And we walk in, and my husband remembers seeing the doctor's face, and just knowing that it wasn't good. And we had no embryos.
again.
Like none made it to day 5.
Oh my God.
It was, I mean, we're living in a very tragic time now, but at that moment, it was the worst day of my life. It felt like I was young, no one knew what was wrong, and I didn't know how to even move forward. They still had no idea what was wrong. She said maybe I had a mitochondrial issue that was on a forefront of infertility that they hadn't fully started researching yet, or were just starting to research. I mean, no one knows what it was still to this day. And so they had bought a package and for 2 IVFs and 2 transfers, and they were going to kick me out, but then the doctor said, no, you should, we can do it one more time. And I, at that moment, started talking to my rabbi about egg donation. I'm one of those people that have to plan multiple stages ahead. And all I could do, I was pretty paralyzed in my life and career, but all I could do is move this IVF infertility train forward. And so I started talking to him to get him to think through the halakhic issues. He hadn't ever come up with it. And he asked me what I was looking for in a donor, and I gave basics of what I knew. I mean, I'm not sure I really knew anything, but at the time I thought I did. And so he went his way and started thinking about things. The doctor decided that they had a new plan for me for my 3rd round, and they thought they could make it work for a day 5 transfer, because I definitely wasn't ever going to do day 3 again. And so we said okay, but I decided that since it was unexplained infertility, I wanted to get a sperm donor and do my own little science experiment and see if it was my eggs or my eggs with my husband's sperm. So
Okay, right.
I think
So that's the question I was going to ask you. Why did you ask your rabbi about an egg donor? Why didn't you ask him about a sperm donor, or did you
right.
what was the rationale there?
So everyone told us that his sperm was fine. But I was like, you know what? They'll also say my eggs are fine. So let's just see. And so we do IVF with I think a 1/3 or a quarter with the sperm donor. I basically just said to my husband, listen, we don't even need to use these eggs that maybe we could use, but we didn't spend that much time vetting it. It was basically just a science experiment with our embryos. And the doctors were not super excited about it, but they did it. And we got 1 embryo from my husband's sperm and 1 embryo from the sperm donor sperm. And
okay,
so we
and to be clear, these are your eggs, 1 embryo,
right.
1 embryo, donor sperm, 1 embryo, your husband's sperm. Okay.
So I was like, okay. So whatever they did in the stimulation or whatever seemed to have worked enough. And it also didn't seem any better with the sperm donor's sperm. So I believed them that my husband's was probably fine. And so we put in that one embryo, and it didn't take. I wasn't pregnant. And so I was ready to move on to egg donation. I had one of those families that used to be called like a modern family, with lots of divorces and remarriages and step siblings and half siblings. And I had a very close relationship, still have a very close relationship with my stepfather. And I realized that I knew deep down that like family isn't about genetics. So you can feel just as close to someone who you are genetically related to versus not. It's about who's there and who's raising you and who's putting in the work. And I felt comfortable with that. I also just desperately wanted a baby. And at the same time, my rabbi comes back to me and he says, so I have someone that I knew was always interested in egg donation. And I know this woman, and she's interested if you want to have a conversation with her. And it was someone I knew, and someone whose kids I knew, and I respected her, and I thought her children were great. And so we talked, and it made the whole decision so much easier, but my husband wasn't ready to go that route yet. So we did what I will just call a Hail Mary IVF. We went to a new doctor in New York that said, flying from San Francisco, that said that he could scrape some cells from the inside of my uterus to grow on the Petri dish to make like a little blanket for my embryo, for our embryos. But they had to do a day 3 transfer. That's what they do. And so I flew to New York during the last days of Pesach to have my uterus scraped out, or the retrieval or whatever. It was incredibly painful, but at that point, lots of things had been painful. That was maybe some of the worst. And I never understand how they tell you that like you don't need more than an Advil for that. And just put me under.
Yes,
and then we went back. I think I was there for a week with my mom and then a week with my husband for the retrieval and growing of the embryos. And I just made up lies to everyone I knew about why I was in New York. I don't know what anyone thought. I basically had stopped talking to most people at that point. And I think everyone at Scholl just knew that at this point we had been married for 3 years and like they just shouldn't ask. Or maybe married for 4 years. I don't know. Anyway, so we do this, and at the same time, I have my egg donor start filling out her paperwork. Like my husband and I are like, if we go egg donation, this is a great option. Let's do this one last thing. And then, and so we went forward with IVF, but my egg donor has filled out the paperwork. In my head, I'm like already there. I don't actually believe that positive attitude affects this at all, because I was a roller coaster the whole time, and sometimes like hopeful and sometimes not. And I just had to be okay with whatever I felt. And day 3 transfer, we transferred 2 embryos. None of them made it to day 5 again. And so I kind of knew that like it wasn't going to work. And the doctor afterwards was like, well, your estrogen, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, no, you don't get another chance. Like, I'm done being this science experiment. I have to move on. Like, you guys could just go forever on me, is what it felt like. No one knows, and we could just keep going, and you could keep trying different things. But I realized like they need to have a positive perspective because of everything that they see on a daily basis. But really, they're scientists try applying what they have seen work. And I don't really think I ever understood that starting the process. I think I saw like that I would have a 77% chance in 3 cycles.
Go ahead.
And then I realized that I was in the far outskirts of the curve. I was multiple standard deviations out, as my data scientist husband would say. And, anyway, I was done trying to figure it out. And I had a great therapist who did lots of infertility, who specialized in infertility. So we talked through those things. We went to the therapist that the clinic recommended, and she talked with us, and she talked with the egg donor and her husband, and she talked about, and then she talked to all of us together. And the things that were clear were, tell your kid. They were like 20 to 25 years into donor eggs, and just make it part of the normal story. And also, like, because this was someone we knew, we had to figure out how we would tell our kids. So we agreed that when the future baby, who's now my daughter, was about 10, which is old enough to know when hopefully, I mean, if she's not ready at 10, then we won't, but old enough to know when something's private versus something to just like tell everyone, like, hey, I'm an egg donor baby, and this is who was the egg donor. Like, we really just didn't need that going around, mixing everything up through these early years, which I'm still happy about. And so we're coming up on that potentially next year. And so it worked. So there were 6 embryos. We got them all genetically tested because our egg donor was older and we wanted to play it safe. And I remember the doctor calling me, and I just wanted to know the genders because I could. And I was like, I'll put in whatever's the best quality, but like, I just want to know what we're working with. And she was like, well, you had 6 embryos, 3 of them were normal, but are you sure that you want to know the gender? Because they're all the same gender. And at that moment, I was like, I need to know, because I was like, if it's all girls, I can totally handle all girls. If it's all boys, I just need to change my mindset. Like, I grew up with my mom, and like my mom and my sister and I know girls. My husband's one of 3 boys, so like he knew boys, but I was like, I could be an okay boy mom. I just needed to like be on. I always thought I would have like girls and boys, but I was like, just if I only had boys, I needed to get ready for that. It wasn't going to change anything moving forward. And she said that they were all girls, and I was like, okay, I could have like 1 to 3 girls. And I asked her, like, okay, we don't even know if I can get pregnant. I've never had a positive pregnancy test. Like, what do you think the chance that any of these will work? And because we were so deep into it financially and time-wise, and we still had no idea. I mean, part of me was still like, maybe then we just have to adopt or get a surrogate. I mean, the idea of a surrogate at that point would have been a lot financially to think about, but I didn't have another plan. So we were all in on this, and she said she's had 2 out of 3. And I said, okay, like at this point, I just want 1. If I have 2, that's amazing. And when I found out that I was pregnant, it was like, I just went around and I like called my friends. I went to my mom's house. I went to my friend who had been on the journey with me in person, because I was like, if I have a miscarriage, like, then I have one. But even getting pregnant felt like such a big step, and like a huge journey. So this is probably a much longer story, but
all good
leading up to this. But so anyway, awful pregnancy, so nauseous, gestational diabetes. I had this cough that made me throw up the whole time.
oh God.
it was, yeah, it was like my sister kept saying, you can hate being pregnant, and that doesn't mean that you will be a bad mom or that you're not happy that you're going to have a baby. She was just like,
Totally.
separate the two. By then, my sister had had two more kids, and I felt like I was just trying to catch up. And my daughter was born, and it was amazing. I mean, it wasn't easy, but I was happy for like 10 months. I was just like, every moment, I was so just like, whatever it was, I was there for it. Between like 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., I loved almost everything. And then like during the night, I was like, I'm allowed to not like this part. Um, and and it was great. And I was so happy. And we decided that we would try again to put the next embryo in. We didn't know if it would work or if we'd have to start all over. And so we put it in as soon as we possibly could, which would have been like around a 27, 28 month gap. And I had like, I don't know, a month or two of not nursing between so I had like 3.5 years of infertility, awful pregnancy, like 17 or 18 months of nursing, and then we went into IVF. And I got pregnant again. And the pregnancy was slightly better. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have two girls. And that's so great. And my second daughter was born, and she was colicky, but also great. She was a struggle as a baby, but I was just so happy. Then I realized that like nothing with my first daughter had been about me as a mom. It was just like, kids are different.
Yep.
And, I had been worried about all the comments of like what people would say about looking like each other. And a lot of people said my first daughter looked like me. And I was just like, no, she's so much cuter than I am. Like I had like a couple of phrases that I would say, or like, thank you. Or like some people I would just look at and they'd be like, oh, right, I forgot. But she does look like you. And I was just like, I really just wish people would stop having these conversations. But I even find myself sometimes saying it to other people, and have even said it to a friend who has children with egg donation, and was like, but they do kind of look like you. And so like I totally, but with all the sensitivity of someone who knows what that feels like, and I still say it. And so then we were like, okay, you know what? The second one was really hard. Let's just wait. Let's like, the 2.25 year gap was tight for us. And let's like go for more like 3 years. Then our kids will be like a little bit more settled in preschool and kindergarten. And then I had like a 2-day period and it stopped. And I was like, okay, so like it was a little spotting, but like I was just waiting for it to come back. And I think I was like finally, like a week or two before that, I had said, I finally like having 2 kids. Like, never say that out loud. and so I started, but then my period didn't come back, and I started Googling like what could it be if your period stopped. And pregnancy was like the best case scenario. Like everything else was like cancer or something else. And so, but I refused to go to the store and buy a pregnancy test. I was just like, I was so traumatized by all the negative pregnancy tests that I took. I was just like, no. So at the time, Amazon Prime was the best way to get it. And so I Amazon Primed 2 pregnancy tests, and they came up that night. And the next morning, I had remembered like, do it right when you wake up in the morning, because that's when it's the strongest. And so I did it. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning in February. It was dark, but the moon was out, and I immediately, by the light of the moon, saw the plus side.
Oh my gosh.
And my husband is not a morning person. I've spent 14 years almost waking him up. And I run over to him and shake him awake, and I'm like, I'm pregnant. And he just immediately wakes up, and we are just in a state of shock. And I went to work that day, and was just kind of like in a crazy, I just tried to like put it to the side so that I could get through the day. And I saw my dad midday, and I was just like, can we just go for a walk? And I told him, and then I like drove over to my mom's after work, and I told her. And then I in the meantime had called my OB, who was also a Shoal member, and she was at Disneyland with other friends of ours, and was like, I just went to the side, and I was like, okay, so A, I'm pregnant and I don't even understand how this happened, but B, do I need to go on progesterone to like keep the pregnancy? So she had retired. I had a new OB, so I set up an appointment to go get checked out. And they did put me on progesterone just to be safe. And so I went to my mom's, then I went to my sister's, and I said, okay, so I have some good news and some bad news. And she's like, okay. So she like definitely thinks that because I called her and was like, I need to come over and talk to you, that like I'm dying. She just, immediately thinks that, because that's the kind of family we come from. And no one would have thought that I would be pregnant, right? Like that's the other thing. But no, like after you go through what I went through, you don't think you're going to get pregnant. And so I told her, and then I said, but I'm due, if I calculate it right at the time of her oldest daughter's bat mitzvah, which was going to be in Israel. So I was like, I'm not, we're not going to be there. And she was like, well, that's the best reason ever not to go to the bat mitzvah. And so, and then I had an amazing pregnancy. I didn't have gestational diabetes for it. It was like really easy, running around after 2 kids. And it was great. And then I had like the delivery of my dreams, followed by a 1-night NICU stay for my daughter. So I was like, who cares about delivery? Because if you're not like getting that skin to skin, like first day, it doesn't matter. Yep. And so that was like October 2019. My last daughter was born. So we had a few months, and then the whole world shut down. And yeah, so now I have a 4-year-old, an almost 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And it all feels, the emotions are still there when I think about the miracles and the struggles, but it's so much farther away. Like I can usually talk about it without tearing up, although that day when we had no embryos, that was still bad. And now we're like on this, it's a different plane. Like, first of all, like it both feels exactly how I thought it was going to feel being a mom to kids with egg donation. As in, they're totally my kids. There's no one else who is their mom. Like when they call her Aimee, it's me. And like, I'm not only Aimee, I am like the preferred parent and person for my 3 kids and my dog. And honestly, my husband also. And so it's like, I'm just like, they don't feel any less of me, even if genetically it's not my tissue and genetics that made them. And then, also with having my youngest by a surprise miracle, we also got the science experiment of like what it would be like to have my own genetics, and is that different? And honestly, no, it's not different, other than she looks more like me. And now as she's getting older and everyone's saying it, and my other kids are there, I'm like getting triggered for them, but I don't think they care, because they look enough like each other that they just think like, oh, we look like each other, and people get us confused, and it's so funny. And they also don't look like not like me. But I asked them going into this, I was like, do you guys have do you have any thoughts about like
Yeah, like before maybe I'm going to stop you just for a second. And before you get to that, can you know, when did you decide, like what was the decision in terms of um how to tell them, when to tell them?
Oh,
Um
right.
because
Yeah.
you mentioned something about like waiting until they're 10, but they're
Well, so
clearly
that was to say who it was, not to say
not,
like,
who, okay, who
sorry.
the donor was. Okay,
So
got it.
because we were
Got
like, yes, we have to tell them right away. So I actually, through Hasidah, was part of a group that did donor egg, like families who conceived with donor eggs, a support group. So it was like 4 of us who would get together and talk about it. And Edie from Hasidah ran it, and she did a lot of research onto like what are the books, and she brought all these different books and was like, I like this one for this, I like this one for this, I hate these ones for these reasons. And so I just started with the books when they were younger. And I mean, to be honest, I had a lot of intentionality at the beginning of it. And there have been long swaths of time where I realize I haven't said it recently. And so I just like bring it back into the conversation. And then my mom's like, oh, they just mentioned how like these two are from an egg donor, but this one's not. And I'm like, yeah, because I just like re-brought it up in the conversation. So I mean, they've never really like, they're just like, oh, it's different. We live in such a different time now. Like all
totally.
the families look different, and there's not so much pressure for it all to be the same. And we're not in the generation of my parents where there's so much shame around all these differences, um, which I think was also really hard for all of our parents to understand why we wanted to be open about it, like with our kids and the community. They kind of understood and also like would have side conversations with us like, are you really sure that you want to like tell them? Are you really sure you want to tell everyone? Or like, are you worried that other people will know this personal thing about your kid and like use it against them? And or like having it out on social media. And I'm just like, all of those things could happen. Now I'm in a big resilience phase with trying to get my kids to be more resilient. And I'm like, all of those things will just be hurdles that they overcome if they're faced with it. But I also realized that like, as if you talk about it confidently, it's not a sore spot that people can hurt you with. And honestly, I think they almost never think about it. So like, they'll sometimes ask questions. We they are aware of different families in different ways, and also totally like don't think about it. So my middle daughter was really into this baby who we were with around Pesach. And it was friends of mine from a long time ago who were visiting. And she was like, I really want to be a mother's helper. And I was like, okay, but this baby has 2 dads. So maybe you're going to be like a daddy's helper. And she's like, you can still call them mother's helper. And I was like, okay. And so, I'm like, so just, and in the way that you have 2 dads, like that baby was also born with an egg donor and a surrogate. And there's, it's so different. I mean, it's so normalized in this way that very few things in my childhood were. Everything was like, anything that was like divorce or an eating disorder or whatever, or mental health, all of those things were just so taboo and no one talked about them. I mean, obviously divorce people knew about, but it was still like a pain point. And this is the new way that we're making families. And it's amazing. I was saying to my oldest the other night, she was asking why you were interviewing me about this. And I said, because, and I had to figure out how to say it in a way that made it clear that some people might feel shame about not being able to have a baby in the way that they had always thought, but in a way that made her not at all feel like she was brought into this world in anything less than a super intentional miracle that I am thankful for every day. Um,
And so what did you say?
so I said, some people, when they're trying to have a baby, we talk a lot about having to have a baby with the help of science. And I said, some people, when they can't have a baby the natural way that they were expecting and need the help of science or of an egg donor or a sperm donor, they can, it can feel uncomfortable. But by me sharing the story and how thankful I am for my egg donor and how amazing it is to have you and your sister, and I can make them know that this is a great option and that this is a way to build an amazing family and make people feel more comfortable in their journeys. And she was like, oh, and then I was, we were talking, I was like, so do you ever think about like looking like me or like your sister when people talk about, and she was like, well, we have the same hair color and we have the same hair length. And I'm like, well, that's not, I mean, that's a chosen thing. And then she was like, and we both really like to help people. And it was one of those like really nice moments where I was like, oh, first of all, thank you for being that. And I mean, she's like has such a neshama, like a beautiful soul of kindness. And so I was flattered that she was lumping me in there with her. But like, they do look for things that are similar. And so they're like, I look like you, or we have the same hair color. My middle daughter, we don't exactly have the same hair color. Hers is lighter and hers is curlier. Hers is like my dream Jewish summer camp. I wish I had my whole life had hair like that. But my hair's straight. And, and she's like, a couple of years ago, she's like, Ema, we have the same hair color. And I'm just like, yeah. And then my youngest daughter at the Shabbat dinner table last week was like, Ema, I look like you. And I like, in that moment, I just got this pit of my stomach feeling of like, I am so triggered by this because I had just built myself up to be like, it's okay. I don't look like my mom or my dad. And my sister looks like them. And I grew up my whole life not looking like them, but still being genetically theirs and being okay with that going forward. And then it was like my 4-year-old says this, and I'm like, do you guys feel bad? No. And I look at my husband and he's like, don't make this into a thing. And I'm like, okay, this is not a thing. Everyone's fine. We've normalized our family. Like, I'm going to have to figure out how to deal with this going forward because this will probably come up a lot more. So that's just like my thing of the now, which is now that my 4-year-old is coming out of her like small COVID lifestyle that was separate and is going to be in school with my bigger kids. It's like everyone sees all of us together all the time, and there are more comments.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I either just tell people flat out and make them a little bit uncomfortable, so that I'm like, yeah, how does that foot taste in your mouth? Or I just shrug it off, depending on, if it's one of my daughter's teachers, I don't really want to make them feel bad, because I'm so grateful for everything they do. But yeah. I mean, for the most part, I think all of that has been easier than I expected, and also like still a thing that I have to deal with.
Yeah. I so much appreciate your candor about all of it. And I know I know everyone listening is also like just it is so helpful to hear in real time, like, okay, your children are not babies anymore. Like, how does this play out? Like, what does this mean? Like, you can't know what the future looks like, but as you said, these very deliberate pieces that you're putting into place and you have put into place from the moment that they've been born, and how you're trying to train them in addition to training everybody else on how to respond. I mean, I think it's incredible. It's incredible. If I could ask you one last question. So, advice for the people out there that are scared, that are worried, that are, thinking about this, but don't know, you know, don't know if they could ever do it for many reasons, like some of which you've already addressed, like, Could I actually love a child that doesn't have my genetics? The answer, yes. Can we have a blended family? The answer is yes. Did you know that it was going to be a blended family? No, like you had no idea. This was a surprise. But like for people who are, still sitting with this and just grappling with it, advice for them.
So I know that it was easier for me because I knew the person who was being my donor, but also she wasn't someone who was gonna be standing. It wasn't like my sister or someone who's gonna be like watching the whole thing. She was a bit more removed. And so it was like I can look at my kids and see her in them and love them for her and the gift that she gave me. Um, and like to me, that's why I've done so much work in infertility. It's like trying to pay back this gift that I will never be able to pay back. So I know it's harder when you don't know the person. Um, and also, I would just say what I've really seen as my kids get older is that even the genetics within us, we don't know how that plays out. We don't know what comes from our great great grandparents. And as this past year, I've been really working with my older two to try to figure out like emotional, um, mental, how they learn, resilient, physical, just like the whole thing. Um, and it's like some of it I don't know where it comes from. And some of it might come from my husband's side, some of it might come from the egg donor side, some of it might just be them. And also, it doesn't actually matter where it comes from because I still have to figure it out no matter what. Like, I am still the world's expert on kid A, B, or C, and I'm still the one advocating for them to their doctors and describing them to their teachers so they can understand them. Like, I am still the one who is spending all of the time thinking about which camp they should go to and have the spreadsheets and what extracurriculars they need and which extracurriculars will help them achieve the things that they're lacking, and having those conversations on the regular. And I mean, there is nothing about that journey that is any different than a parent who has their own kid genetically. Like, they still have to do all of that work and all of even if you have a genetic kid with you and your husband and all of the living grandparents and all of the medical history, you still have weird stuff you have to figure out. and like, it's, to me, it's so clear in the time that we live in that so much of it has to do with the community you surround yourself with. Like, I was worried, I remember, about telling my parents, like, would they be sad that they wouldn't have a grandchild that was genetically mine? I mean, my sister had enough that, theoretically the same genetics, but I felt sad about it. Like, I knew that I was like a cute, charming kid that, excuse me, that they enjoyed. And I wanted to give that to them. I knew they were great grandparents and I mean, honestly, the amount that they love my kids is not at all different for any of the three of them. And the amount that they loved the first one, because we had all waited so long for her, was even more. I mean, it's not more now. It's just in that moment, like, I would say for a year or two, everyone saw her in this way of the greatest miracle. And each night before going to bed, like since she was a baby, and then I realized I would say it to all of them, I just say, you are my miracle from Hashem and the best thing that ever happened to me, and I love you more than anything in the world. And so, like, they all know they are my miracle straight from Hashem. Like, I don't think I could have had this any other way. And I mean, thank God for science also. And like, the help of my rabbi and my egg donor. And I had so much support from my family. And my husband, amazingly, was very calm through all of this and rational and let me go totally insane. I mean, through a large process of part of that. But I mean, I wouldn't trade them for anything. And, I had a lot of guilt about being that person who got pregnant after having kids through egg donation, because everyone was like, well, you never know if you stop trying. And I was just like, I'm not that person. You don't spend that much money and that many cycles and then get pregnant. Of course, all the OBs are like, oh, yeah, this happens all the time. Like, that's why we kept talking to you about birth control. And I was just like, okay. But I felt for a really long time very guilty because I was so identified. I so identified with the infertility community that I didn't even want to tell people. But at the same time, it was such a miracle. I had to celebrate it. So, I mean, it's been a journey, and also parenting is so hard. Like, I rarely have any time to think about this anymore because I'm just in the world of taking care of my kids. And in that way, like, I always think when people see us like walking around the neighborhood or walking to school, like they look at me and they think like, wow, she's so lucky. Like, I have these 3 cute daughters, and sometimes they're in matching dresses and sometimes they're giggling. And I'm like, you have no idea what I went through to get there. And also, you have no idea how much screaming and crying there is all the time. And like, we have good moments, and then we have like all the other moments that everyone else has. And it's like an amazing blessing to get to have all of that. And it didn't make any of that easier, nor did I take any of that time as like, oh, I don't have kids yet, I should just enjoy myself. Like, and I forgive myself for all of that.
As you should, there are, as you were talking about your girls and everything that you've been through, and how just, this world is hard, and parenting is also hard, but like the incredible gifts that you have been given and what miracles they are. I started getting tears that or started rolling down my face here. And I think that anyone who is listening to the story will also feel exactly the same. This is, it is everything you said. We are living in an era of tremendous miracles that are due to science. Obviously, also, God has his hand. He is the one who controls all, but science has enabled so many more people to be able to have families. And it's an incredible gift, an incredible gift. And your family is an incredible gift also. Thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing their story, and for giving hope and chizuk to people who are considering this journey, or maybe not as far along as you are right now, maybe with little ones, and like wondering how is it going to turn out and what it's going to be like, and just like giving them a little bit of a window into the future. It is so helpful and so hopeful. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Aimee, for spending this week bringing light onto normalizing egg donation and taking the time to do this, and for all that you're doing to help the people who are going through the struggle. I wish that you had been around doing this, 12 years ago, but I guess we didn't have social media back then. So
The world was different, right?
yeah, totally.